Hi, welcome to Board Gems. In this video series, I like to introduce to viewers like you older games which might still be gems today. Would you even know? If a game came out in 2006 or 2007, you hadn't heard of it, you hadn't played it, maybe it's a great game, how would you know? Some games I cover are still famous. They reached a level of familiarity, a level of respect in the hobby, such as the game I covered last time, El Grande. Still respected, still very famous today. This one came out 2006, hasn't had a printing since 2007. So it's almost certainly unknown to a lot of modern board game hobbyists. The game is called Arcadia. That's the multilingual name. The original German was Die Baumeister von Arcadia. It was designed by Rüdiger Dorn and published by Ravensburger. Nominated for Game of the Year in 2007, or at least was recommended. Lots of great games nominated or recommended that year. Games that I intend to cover at some point, such as Thebes and Ispahan. The eventual winner was Zuleretto, which I'm not a huge fan of, actually. I prefer the card game version Coloretto, as well as the sort of smaller, streamlined version of Zuleretto called Zuleretto Mini. Arcadia is for 2 to 4 players, ages 10 and up, takes about 45 to 60 minutes to play. I think all of that is pretty accurate. Younger people could possibly play this game, but it's not an exciting game. It looks quite dry. You'll see later on, like, this is almost a definition of the boring, dry-looking Euro, with the beige board and brown buildings and architect looking at a castle. Arcadia is a pretty unique game even today. It does feature polyominoes, which were not as common in 2007, is more common now. But it pairs it with a form of stock manipulation. As you build these polyomino buildings on the board, as you surround buildings, either with other buildings or with your own workers, you get seals, which are a form of shares or stocks. And the value of these shares and stocks go up or down based on the player actions. This video series used to be called Why It's a Gem, and I only covered gems. Lately I've changed it to Is It a Gem? Because I want to be able to cover requests from people of games that I actually don't particularly like, but I want to recognize the request and to cover them. Arcadia was a request. So suspense. Is it a gem or not? Let's see after I show you how to play. To set up the game, place the board on the table between the players. You'll have 28 of these castle pieces, and they each have a different colored seal on them. 7 of each color. 1 is going to go on each of these spaces that are marked with a 3. That's for round 3. And the rest are placed for these rounds 1 and 2. There's 3 for each round, so you're going to have to stack them. Decide where the castle foundation goes. And it can go anywhere on the board, so long as it doesn't cover up one of these brown splotches. I bet in this video they don't show a lot of detail. They're supposed to be sort of encampments, worker camps. So you're not allowed to cover any of those. So you could do something like this or something like that. You're going to put a bunch of stuff off to the side. A bunch of building tiles. Money. Money is points. You don't actually ever spend the money on anything. Seals. And workers. In the 4-player colors and neutral. Each player, it's player shield, which they put in front of themselves, and 4 banners of their color, which they hang from their shield. Players will start with 3 workers in their color, which they put behind their screen, as well as 4 cards. I'm going to shuffle up the cards, deal 4 to every player, and they take these cards and they put them behind their screen. You're going to put 3 face up along with the rest of the deck of cards. You're ready to begin. The goal of the game is to get the most gold / victory points. in order to get points, you're going to be collecting these seals. And at various points during the game, you can choose to cash in your seals for their current value. And the current value is however many seals of that color you can see in the castle. So right now there's 2 of every color seal, which means every seal is worth 2 victory points. But over the course of the game, these castle pieces will be placed on the foundation, thus changing the number of seals of each color that's visible. At the end of your turn, you can spend one of your banners to get more workers and also cash in seals. You can do that 4 times for your 4 banners, and it'll happen again at the end of the game for any seals you happen to have left over. Players are going to be building these building tiles, placing them on the board along with a seal, matching the type of card played, type, the shape of the building, and the color. When a building is surrounded, players will gain these seals based on the number of their workers around the building. On your turn, you can do one of 2 things. You can build one of the building tiles onto the board, or you can place workers. Place a building on the board, you discard a card, and when you play a card, it's out of the game. Cards are never reshuffled. There's 1 card for every building tile. Grab a matching tile of the same shape and the appropriate color seal and place it somewhere on the board. It has to touch on one edge a building that's already on the board, or a worker that's already on the board. Workers can also occupy these spaces. And the castle itself counts as a building for this purpose. So you could do something like this. As you can imagine, you cannot place on top of tiles or workers that are already on the board. If you happen to cover these worker camps, like so, you will gain 1 neutral colored worker for every camp that you cover. This play, I have covered 2 encampments, so I would gain 2 neutral colored workers, and I would place them behind my screen. This card goes out of the game. Then I draw a replacement card. It can be any of the 3 face up or blind from the deck. Instead of placing a building, I can instead pick a building that's already on the board and place as many workers that I have behind my screen as I want around the empty spaces of that building. Empty spaces being all the spaces that are adjacent to one of the squares of the building, and not including diagonal. So this building has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 empty spaces around it. And when those empty spaces are filled, either with building or with workers, then we will grant seals. So a player could pick this building and place workers on any of the empty spaces around it that they want. So they could do something like this, for example. Of course, you can imagine there are multiple buildings already on the board. Something like this, let's say. Then a player could do something like this, and they can use any combination of their own color workers and neutral workers. So if they wanted to, they could do something like this. They don't have to. They can choose how many to put down. If I wanted to, I could just put down this guy. But let's suppose I want to surround a building. In this case, the building scores. Everybody who has a worker of their color next to the building will gain 1 seal of that color. And the player who surrounded the building on their turn will get this seal. So in this example, yellow would score 3 silver seals. 2 for the workers of their color, and 1 that's on the building because they completed it. Now, instead, it could be something like this. The purple player could put a building down like this. Let's say it was this type. This building is surrounded as well. And in this case, yellow would get 1 seal for having 1 worker next to the building, and the player, in this example purple, who surrounded it by placing this building, would get this seal. So as you can see, it can be good to have your workers adjacent to multiple buildings. So when these buildings are surrounded, they will get multiple seals. Let's say it was purple's turn. Purple chose this building and surrounded it like this. So this building is surrounded. Yellow gets 1 seal. Purple gets 1 seal for this worker. And because it's purple's turn, they would get this seal. Note, the neutral workers don't grant you any seals, but they do help you surround a building. Thing is scored, and seals are granted. Then the player whose turn it is, the player who did the surrounding, chooses one of the tower blocks that is in the current round space. So there's 1, 2, 3. This is round 1. They can pick any tower, doesn't have to match that color, any tower they want, and place it on any space directly on the foundation, on the ground floor. They can cover another color. Maybe they know that yellow is collecting red and they want to devalue red, so they cover a red with a black. At the end of your turn, if you want to, you may optionally turn in one of your 4 banners, and this does 2 things. First, you get 2 more workers of your color, which you put behind your screen, and you can cash in as many or as few seals as you want and gain victory points / gold coins based on their current value, what is showing on the castle. So a player who cashed in their banner could, at this moment, turn in black seals for 3, but red seals only 1 coin. The player may, but doesn't have to, may turn in one of their banners at the end of their turn to gain 2 workers and optionally cash in seals. But you don't have to cash in any seals, or you can choose to cash in some and hang on to others. Clockwise, until 10 of these 12 towers are placed on the castle such that the ground floor is complete. Let's skip ahead. Let's say it looks something like this. So let's say at the end of a player's turn, this is what the castle looked like. At this point, the remaining 2 castle pieces will get added to the pile for round 3. And then we continue just where we left off with the round 2 pieces, constructing the second story. And players will continue using these tower blocks, the lowest level, before you can build up on the next level. Once the second story is complete, then again, the remaining tower blocks will be added to round 3. Game is triggered. The castle is almost complete. It's 1 more turn, including the player who triggered the end of the game. And at this point, if they surround buildings and they add more castle pieces, they take from these castle pieces here, placing anywhere they want on the 3rd floor. So each player gets 1 more turn, and the last player to take a turn is the player who triggered the end of the game, who built the 20th tower piece and completed the second story. The banners left, that's fine. You will cash in all the rest of your seals based on the state of the castle, the view of the castle from above at the end of the game. And the player with the most gold coins wins. That's it. You're ready to play Arcadia. You don't see it as much anymore, but there used to be a lot of games that were criticized among hobbyists, at least the hobbyists in the English-speaking world, like on Board Game Geek, for example. I don't know about Germany. But certainly among English speakers, there was kind of a lament about boring-looking, dry Euros, of which, at least from a presentation point of view, Arcadia is almost a poster child. It has a very typical look for a dry Euro, where there's a big castle or cathedral being built in the background, and there's some architect with a scroll just checking. It's like, yep, we put the tower in the right place. Phew, glad we didn't waste the last 20 years of our lives. And you have the board and you have the pieces on, and it's a sea of beige. Yellowish beige with brown buildings, and it's not much of a looker. Even though it has these great castle pieces, because you're building up this castle, right, as the game goes on, even they're beige. Could have been an opportunity for a splash of color excitement. It could be the centerpiece of the game, but no, that's beige too. At least the player colors pop a little bit. So if you knew nothing about this game, and you just saw this on the shelf, and you, in fact, were tired of boring-looking dry Euros, you would definitely pass on this. It's like, yeah, I know the type. Moving on. There are tons and tons of games in the world, and you need some way to sort all the information coming in about all the games that have previously been made and all the new ones coming in, and finding a way to sort them into heaps. This is the heap of games I'm interested in. Here's the much larger heap of games that I'm going to not look at further unless something happens. Maybe I get a recommendation or something. So some people would look at that and go, not interested. Until somebody mentions that they like the game and recommend it, then you might take another look at it. Well, here's me offering my recommendation to this game. That is to say, if you like the type of games I tend to cover, you may also like this. Because, yeah, okay, we can make fun of the presentation, but honestly, what matters is the gameplay. Before its time, I would say, because it blends kind of a stock manipulation and, to a lesser degree, speculation with polyominoes, right? Tetris-like pieces. And now polyominoes are all over the place, and you got Uwe Rosenberg doing all sorts of stuff with like Patchwork and other games. And there's lots of games that involve polyominoes, like Barren Park and all this stuff. But this was well before that trend. It's less about the fitting, because the fitting matters, but you're not just fitting polyominoes together. The polyominoes are just the shape that the rest of the game is kind of built around. You can almost think of like Princes of Florence as another example of that. Yes, the buildings are polyominoes, but the polyominoes isn't really the point, if that makes sense. There's just a variety of shapes, and the game is what's around those shapes. And then, of course, you have a very interesting pairing with a form of stock manipulation. And as you build buildings on the board, the values of the seals, of particular seals, of the guilds go up or down, and you're collecting these seals, and you want an opportunity to cash them in when they're valuable. I don't know that makes a huge amount of sense in terms of the setting, but the setting is nothing, right? It's the most generic of Euro settings. So, you know what? All I need is a light glazing of a setting. I don't usually prefer pure abstract games from a presentation point of view, that they're just stark. I prefer there to be a setting, but it doesn't have to be strongly themed, right? I don't think, oh, I feel like I'm in Arcadia. No, it's fine. It's a generic setting, but it's one that melts away and you just play the game. I mean, I'm not a foodie, but I would imagine if you add a spice, you don't necessarily have to add a lot of that spice, right? You don't want the meal to be about that spice. This meal is nutmeg and a bunch of other stuff, but it's mostly nutmeg because when you eat it, that's what you're going to notice, right? No, a pinch is all that's necessary, right? It just adds a little bit of flavor. The unique blend of polyomino placement along with the stock manipulation makes it a unique game, which is a good thing. There's not going to be another game in your collection that's going to be quite like this, But on the other hand, it does make it a little bit hard to teach. It's not intuitive because nothing about the setting is necessarily going to help you remember the rules. Generally speaking, you have two options on your turn. Place workers, place a building. Workers, they are a limited resource. You can get more periodically during the game, but when you get more is also the opportunity to cash in on your seal values. So you don't necessarily want to just get workers as fast as possible, because when you're taking that opportunity, maybe that's not the best time to be cashing in your seals. You ideally want to do both at the same time. Get more workers, also cash in seals at a good value, because those two options are entwined. You generally want to surround buildings, but you can surround them with workers. You can also kind of surround them with buildings. That last option is a little more opportunistic, right? If you see that there's an option to finish surrounding a building with a building of your own, it's a way to save workers. You get a free seal out of it. If you see opportunities, spaces where there's multiple buildings next to an empty spot, maybe that's where you want to get a worker in. But maybe you want more neutral workers. Those are always handy. But in order to do that, you have to cover those camps pre-printed on the board with buildings. Some players might feel a little bit directionless at the beginning. That goes away after the first game. So generally speaking, the first of the game, you want to cover camps. You don't really have a whole lot to do. The board is wide open, but there's lots of camps pre-printed on the board. So place buildings, try to cover those camps, build up some neutral workers. Then after some buildings are kind of on the board, and you'll see some buildings that are kind of next to each other, then at those intersections, maybe you want to put some workers. Because they'll benefit when all those buildings are surrounded, then that worker is going to score a seal for each of them. And of course, an important part of the game is knowing when is this a good time to cash in my seals, because the value is okay. 3 seals visible is all right. But depending on what seals are visible, like are they on the first level or the second level, what are the likelihoods that the value is going to go down because the seal is going to be covered? And that brings in a little bit of shared incentives. Because if you get the vibe that Stan has a lot of red and you also have a lot of red, and you go after Stan, then you could be fairly confident Stan's not going to tank the value of red. You want certain values to go up. You want to tank values that you don't really have a lot of seals in, but you know other players are collecting a lot of seals. If you see one player collecting a lot of silver, and you aren't, tank silver whenever you can, right? But keep in mind, there's HTI. There's hidden trackable information. The seals that you collect, everybody can see that you collect them, and then they go behind your screen. Everybody starts with 2 workers. Whenever you get new workers, everybody sees that, and then they go behind your screen. And it becomes a memory game. As I often say, HTI, hidden trackable information, doesn't bother me because it's a signal to the player from the designer, from the publisher, that the intended way to play is not to worry about that. And for me, it's like, done. I already forgot what you were talking about. Let's just play. For some people for whom games are serious business, then they're going to want to kind of track, right? Honestly, like in practice, for most casual players, is more of a sense of, I know that player has a lot of silver seals, but I don't know exactly how many. I just know it's a lot. I know this player has a lot of neutral workers, because I saw them cover a lot of camps. Exactly how many? I don't know. How many workers do they have behind their screen? 5? Maybe? I don't know. But if you don't like HTI and you want that information out in the open, absolutely works. That's the way it is on yukata.de, where this game is implemented. It's an older implementations. The interface is a little old-fashioned. Still works great. All information that has been revealed at any point during the course of the game is open information. So all the workers players have is open. All the seals players have are open. When you're drawing cards, you can draw face down from the deck or face up from the display. If you draw face up from the display, everybody saw you take that card. That's now public information. the game still works great. The game is quite opportunistic, obviously, especially with more players. So you're probably going to meet a lot of people who think this is best 2 players. I won't deny that. In the 2-player game, you can kind of set yourself up. So you can leave open a gap that is exactly the size of a building for a card you happen to have. And there's, you're playing the odds whether the one other player has that same building and can take advantage of it. You wouldn't do that in a 4-player game, because definitely one other player will put something in there. You can't set yourself up. It becomes more opportunistic. Having said that, the way I like to play games, 3 is the best. It is a Goldilocks game. The game doesn't scale for different player counts. It's the same board. Players have the same number of workers, regardless of how many players are in the game. The main timer is the deck of cards. So in a 2-player game, each player will have more turns and will personally build more buildings, so they'll be able to cover more camps and they'll get more workers in that way than they otherwise would in a 4-player game. At any rate, the game doesn't scale for the different player counts, so in my opinion, it's perfect right in the middle. 3 players is the way to go. But it works great at all player counts. But yeah, it is a bit of an opportunistic game. Particularly, the timing is so critical. Timing games can sometimes get a bad rap because they're hard to appreciate during a first play, because you don't know the timing. It's like an auction where you don't know the value of things. In a timing game, like in this game, you have 4 opportunities over the course of the game to get workers and cash in seals at the same time. When is a good opportunity to cash in seals? When you have seals of a color, then that value is high. But what if you need workers and that's not the case? So should you cash in kind of earlier, right? Should you take advantage of that, cash in a banner to get more workers, and cash in seals? Even if the value of your seals aren't worth very much, you don't have to. You don't have to cash in any seals if you don't want to. Just get those 2 workers. A big part of the game is finding that balance between, that when you need workers is also the time that you can cash in your seals. So you're taking maximum advantage of those opportunities. It's tough to find that balance between when to put, because on your turn, you can just put like 1 or 2 workers down. Right, just on key intersections between buildings that you think will be completed soon, and then you can maximize your opportunities there. But then sometimes you want to be like, I just want to surround one entire building. Like if you see there's like 4 red seals, okay, visible in the castle, and there is still a red seal tower that could be played, and there's a red building on the board, you may want to say, you know what, I'm just going to turn in all my workers, basically surround this red seal building with my workers, get a ton of red seals, use that opportunity to, now that because I surrounded a building, so I get to put a tower piece on. Guess what, I'm putting a red tower, so now there's 5 visible, and now I'm going to cash in all these red seals I got. Again, you have to be mindful of those opportunities. Sometimes you just want to, and it's kind of player controlled too, right? Because you could just dump all your workers around a single building, and just try to do that. It can also be worthwhile to just pick and choose, right? Be a little more careful, hang on to your workers, just put them in, key spots on your turn. You get to choose how many workers to put down. So you may decide, well, I'll just put 1 or 2 on my turn, right? Not surround a building. It will slow the game down a little bit, but it becomes a little bit more, I don't want to exaggerate it, not chess-like, but more thoughtful. But again, it's that timing. So I'm putting down a few little workers, you're putting down a few little workers, and then Stan just dumps all their workers down to finish a building and try to take advantage of that. So you're trying to find those good opportunities. Sometimes hard to do in a first game, but the game definitely rewards multiple plays. Even after your first game, you'll generally have a hang of it. I mean, the first game is still fun, But if you care about, like, oh, I didn't understand, when to do this, when to do that during the game, and that bothers you, it's only that first game out of the way, then you get a total feel for it. It's not a complicated game. If you are playing with a mix of experienced and inexperienced players, just be aware. It is possible for an inexperienced player to set up the next player for a good play. There's a lot of games like that. Doesn't bother me. It's something to be aware of, but it's not like a deep strategy game. So generally speaking, after that first game, okay, they're experienced now. And then after that, it's not much of a problem, I don't think. This is definitely a hidden gem now. You're not going to find this in stores. Like I said, the last printing was over 15 years ago. Still lots of them used because I think a lot of people had the same experience I did, which is played it back in the day, liked it, but eventually, you have to make room for new stuff. You think, oh, well, yeah, I like it, but do I like it enough to own? Right? And then maybe trade it away. It's one of those games where I traded it away, sold it because I had that same experience. I got rid of the game, but then later on, I wanted it again, and it was easy enough for me to get again. There's lots of used copies out there. I know in Europe, probably it's particularly easy to find used and cheap if you want to buy. North America, less so, but there's still a fair number floating around on the aftermarket, and it wouldn't cost you too much to buy. And I'm happy to have it again. And it's interesting how my tastes have kind of hardened. I'm more comfortable with my taste, and it's amazing how many years later, with me first getting into the hobby like 2004, 2005, over 15 years later, then I figure out what's my favorite type of game. But it can be a journey, because there's so many games out there and so many different genres, and you can like a lot of them. You can be dismissive, right? You can be reductive. You can complain about the generic look. You can complain about the color palette. You can complain that the game is not exciting. And these are not faults, but those aspects don't bother me. And what this game does provide are things that I like. Simple to learn. You just need one game to kind of get through the timing aspects, and you see how the whole thing works by the end. And now you can be competitive. And then you can appreciate the joy from tickling your brain cells in a pleasant diversion. It's not hardcore, hurt your brain, concentrate for 2.5 hours kind of game. But it's not, rolling dice and aiming at other dice. High strike. Those games are great in their own ways, but they're obviously complete opposites. And you don't necessarily want an extreme, you want something in the middle, but that middle is going to be different for different people. And where you draw that line, there's multiple axes, right? How complicated the game is to learn versus simple, how much strategy there is compared to tactics. And the presentation can be a part of it, how long the game is. It checks all the boxes that I like in a game. I mean, it could be a little bit more colorful. Doesn't bother me, but, if it ever got a new version, I could see them making it a little bit more colorful. And would it hurt them to throw in some anthropomorphic animals? What is this, 2006? It is 2006. Yeah, this game is from 2006. So I don't know. It's a hidden gem now. There'll be a lot of newer hobbyists that would not know about this game. But if you like the type of game I like to promote, I like to talk about, that has simple rules, but a bit of depth, a bit of thinkiness, not too complex, plays in 45 to 75 minutes, say. It's a nice diversion that exercises your brain cells a little bit. In that type of space, I have room for lots of games that fit that niche. And I'm super happy to have Arcadia again, and I don't see it leaving my collection anytime soon. Thanks for watching. Remember, older games like Arcadia don't stop being good because newer games come out. All right, take care.